Donald Trump loses another court case. This time, a court of appeals has ruled that he's on the hook for the $83.3 million verdict that a jury awarded against him in the E. Jean Carroll defamation trial. And we're unpacking that opinion, the appellate court opinion. He now has to pay that amount within 30 days. I'm Shant, that's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. If you like this content, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Brian, where do we start here with this opinion?
Well, this opinion just came down from the Court of Appeals, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. So fun little fact here is that Trump himself moved the case from New York State Court to federal court because he thought he was going to get a better shake in a federal courthouse than in the state court. And it didn't work out that way for him. This all relates to the E. Jean Carroll incident at Bergdorf Goodman a long time ago when Trump, and we don't even have to say allegedly because a jury found that Trump assaulted her by inserting his fingers in her genitalia. I believe there was unwanted kissing, touching in, I believe, a dressing room. I think these are the facts of the case. But that isn't so much what the case is about. That's the genesis of the case, Shant. But what it's really about is that Trump went out and repeatedly defamed her
by denying those allegations, by saying she's making it up, by saying
not just, sorry to interrupt you, Shant, but not just denying it, but calling her a liar, telling it that she was a Democratic operative, that this was all garbage, bullshit, that he doesn't know her, doesn't have any idea with her. And, you know, she put on evidence at trial that she actually suffered real harm here, that she had a job at Elle magazine, which is a magazine I'm not that familiar with, but I believe it's been around for a long time. And she ended up losing that job, and that she was making $50,000 a year, at least as a freelance writer. She wasn't able to do that anymore, and she went to about $500 a year that she was making. So real damages.
Yeah. Well, the verdict is comprised of two components of it. There's a compensatory component, which is $18.3 million. And then there's a punitive damages component of $65 million.
Or if you were representing him, you'd call a bad day.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. He came in second in that trial.
Right. And we joke about that, but you know, this is a very bad result for him.
It's huge.
It's a very large punitive damages verdict. And just putting on my real lawyer hat here, the United States Supreme Court limits punitive damages to no more than 10 times the multiplier of the compensatory. And then there's all kinds of due process rules that apply about how much in punitive damages. And in my opinion, this is at the very high end of what you would ever expect to get in punitive damages. So, you know, as someone who's tried a lot of cases and had punitive damage verdicts where I've won them on behalf of clients, and so has Shant, this was a very, very surprisingly large verdict. Now, given the fact of who he is and what happened and what occurred here, maybe not, but this is a stunningly large verdict, given the amount of compensatory damages.
It is. And the issue that was sort of being decided by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in this opinion is a number of issues like presidential immunity. Trump basically appealed it like he does every single ruling that he gets. And one of the key issues was presidential immunity. And the Court of Appeals found on that issue that this was private speech, and these are not official acts protected by the Supreme Court's ruling in another Trump case, by the way, the immunity ruling, Trump v. United States, the 2024 decision. So this is private stuff. You know, calling E. Jean Carroll a liar and saying that she's not my type, you know, that's all private stuff. He's not doing that in his official capacity as a president. That's not something he's doing in the course and scope of him being the commander in chief and leader of the nation. So they struck down that argument. There are a number of other issues. I think let's
pause and set on that for a second, because this opinion doesn't deal too much with that because that issue has already been decided. But this, he had this decision that the well-known now in 2024 about presidential immunity. He actually raised it early. One of the things the court said is he didn't raise it early enough. But even if he had, these were outside of his duties as president of the United States. You know, these are comments that were made. This is an event that occurred a long time ago, before, he even ran for president. And these facts relate to the comments and statements he made, even though at the time he was and wasn't president, because it happened both before during and after him being president, right?
Yeah. And I think the time matters less whether or not he was president than just the context of the comments. That's private speech. He's not making that in his capacity as president or as part of his job as president. So they ultimately said that they conclude that Trump has failed to identify any grounds that would warrant reconsidering our prior holding on presidential immunity. So that argument got rejected. He made a number of evidentiary, there was a number of evidentiary issues or evidentiary rulings that were also considered on appeal. The Court of Appeals found no errors, and any errors that were made, they found them to be harmless. For example, restricting questioning about certain witnesses and things like that.
Shant, I'm sorry. This is also, there are two cases here, right? Two separate cases. What the court refers to as Carroll 1 and Carroll 2. And I believe that the other case, which is, I think, Carroll 1, was the $5 million verdict actually for the sexual assault. That may have been Carroll 2, but so there are two separate cases here. One is the case about the actual sexual assault, and that was like a $5 million verdict that she received. And then the defamation, which had a much larger verdict, which, to me kind of undermines his claim that his statements weren't that significant, right? Because the jury found the sexual assault was $5 million, which, is consistent with cases that we've seen and handled. But that the defamation was over $16 million in compensatory or economic damages plus.
Right. Right. And wasn't the issue of the punitive damages also something that Trump tried to argue on appeal as well?
Sure.
Argued
that it was excessive.
Wasn't fair. Yeah. Yeah. And that is a typical argument, by the way. I've seen in our community and the work we do, I've seen punitive damages awards get cut down by a court of appeal. It got completely upheld here. It got upheld as, quote, fair and reasonable, unquote. And the court specifically in the opinion cites to the remarkably high degree of reprehensibility in Trump's actions, because he continued doing this over the course of 5 years.
They found was, and we're talking about his actions in repeatedly making statements defaming her.
Over the course of like 5 years. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, in one interview he mentioned it and this is just a gotcha, he said the wrong thing in an interview. Because sometimes you have defamation cases like that and those have merit too, but the damages might not be that big. But over here for 5 years, he basically attacked this woman and attacked the allegations that she made, which, as you said, are no longer allegations. The jury has found that they're true. For 5 years, he went on to do that. The court found that there's apparently evidence that shows that 85 to 104 million people viewed these comments and these attacks and these statements about her.
I mean, my only comment with respect to that shot is if 100 million people viewed this, what about the other 250 million people in the United States?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I mean, how many people know about this? This was how many of his supporters know about this? Yeah. Look, I think it's worth discussing briefly two things. One is, what's the point of punitive damages? And the other is the irony in who Trump, we refer to as the litigator in chief, being held liable for defamation to the tune of $85 million when he goes around consistently, misinterpreting the law and saying that, other people, that he's been defamed. Well, I guess one thing is it takes one to know one, right? But the problem here is the court specifically applied the standard of actual malice, right? That New York Times versus Sullivan, that the law is very clear out there. You have to have actual malice in the circumstance. And they found that he did have actual malice, But I think the other thing that's worth discussing, Shant, is like, what is exactly the purpose of punitive damages? And did it work here?
Yeah. The purpose of punitive damages is to deter future conduct. It's to punish. It's not just to compensate the victim of the harm, the victim of the tort or the harm, but it's to also deter the perpetrator, and in this case Donald Trump, from continuing to engage or ever engaging again in that type of behavior. And the court found that over here they used the phrase that a substantial financial penalty was needed to deter him from doing things like this again. And that's truly the essence of what the purpose of punitive damages is. Yes, it does go to the victim. It does go to the plaintiff or whoever's bringing the case. But the purpose is not necessarily to compensate them. Their purpose is to deter future conduct, and it's not available in every case. There's a relatively high standard, right, Brian? You need malice, fraud, oppression, or a conscious disregard of someone that's at substantial risk for harm.
Right.
It's a high standard.
But I guess it's a very high standard. The jury found the standard. He's got to pay this, as you said at the outset, within 30 days or further appeal it, which he absolutely will appeal this to the United States Supreme Court. But Shant, the other thing I wanted to mention about this is that if the effect is to deter the person and to get them to stop acting in a particular manner, it has at this point, maybe until he writes an $85 million check, which, by the way, is also accruing interest,
right,
at a very high rate, probably, anywhere from 6 to 10% interest on it, which is ironically higher than the Fed is authorized for loans, which is kind of funny, right? But I think that it's had, this has had no effect on Trump. And
no, I don't think
he's
so.
He's not going to stop his conduct. So next time a case like this comes around, I mean, it would be within the jury's purview to find more in the way of punitive damages. Anyway, that's my last thought on this. I just find so much irony in this whole situation, this whole case. And by the way, this all occurred before the Billy Bush, hidden microphone incident, where he talked about grabbing women's genitalia, and this just is completely consistent with that, right?
Right. So, yeah, exactly. What he did to Eugene Carroll is completely consistent. And I find it ironic that the person going around and complaining of defamation and losing the cases he brings, by the way, is now hit with a judgment like this, which has now been affirmed, and he has to pay it within 30 days, unless he appeals it to an en banc appeal to the rest of the Court of Appeals in that district, or up to the Supreme Court, which I suspect he might do. That might be the next thing we're covering. We're going to cover the absurd arguments he makes if he does appeal it further, if Trump appeals it further. So,
right. So let's stay tuned. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. You like this content, remember to hit that subscribe button so you can keep up with us and share your feedback. We like hearing from you, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.